In this lesson, we'll be looking at the error of naturalist alarmism. What we'll be looking at is what it is, some specific problems with its three major forms, and then biblical problems with these three forms and naturalist alarmism overall. First of all, what the heck is it? It's the belief that Earth, or all humans, or all life, or at least the vast majority of one of these things or so, can or will be wiped out by natural/human, but not all supernatural, means. Probably understand it more when we look at the three major forms, which are disease alarmism, which is living in fear of disease spread and being afraid that it will wipe out the vast majority or all of us. Neo-Malthusianism, which is fear that there can be human overpopulation that will lead to exhaustion of resources and eventual extinction. And thirdly, naturalistic catastrophic climate change, which is the belief that Earth's global climate can change to the point of causing mass multi-species killing by natural/human or anthropogenic, meaning man-originated, means. So let's look at some specific problems with disease alarmism. First of all, it has many dangerous consequences and irresponsible responses, which include mass amounts of hysteria, panic, hateful social division and stigmatization, excessive restrictive regulations like excessive quarantine, which is damaging to the human psyche, hence the large effort to eliminate isolation cells. Again, I'm going to say it again. I'm saying excessive quarantine and excessive restrictive regulations. Just want to make sure everybody picked up on that. And there's also massive amounts of other generally poor solution efforts, like, for example, Pfizer not testing whether their vaccine stops transmission before releasing it.
Pfizer COVID vaccine tested on stopping the transmission of the virus before it entered the market. If not, please say it clearly. If yes, are you willing to share the data with this committee? And I really want a straight answer, yes or no, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Regarding the question around, did we know about stopping humanisation before it's entered the market? No. We had to really move at the speed of science.
There are some examples of that hateful social division and stigmatization I mentioned. Quote, Iowa widow blames unvaccinated people for her husband's death from breakthrough COVID infection. Breakthrough meaning he was vaccinated against it. Continuing, quote, it's that kind of attitude that killed my husband, Ardith Keplinger said. Here's another. Quote, these unvaccinated individuals also experienced hostile sentiments and public shaming, loss of employment, and denial of access to normal social life, calls to deny them medical care, and even celebrations of their deaths on websites such as sorryantivaxxer.com. And finally, quote, we demonstrate that vaccinated people express discriminatory attitudes towards unvaccinated individuals at a level as high as discriminatory attitudes that are commonly aimed at immigrant and minority populations. By contrast, there is an absence of evidence that unvaccinated individuals display discriminatory attitudes toward vaccinated people, except for the presence of negative affectivity in Germany and the USA. And another specific problem with disease alarmism is that we've survived pretty well so far, despite all the diseases we've been plagued with. The two worst pan/epidemics that have ever been recorded had death tolls of 15 to 100 million for the number one and 17 to 100 million for number two, which the maximums then would have been 5.4% of the world population for the number one and 60% of population of Europe for number two. And despite this, our population has increased well to over 8.2 billion today. So definitely hasn't slowed down our population growth that much then, or at least not significantly enough. Speaking of human population, let's look at some of the specific problems with neo-Malthusianism. See, the primary particular problem with neo-Malthusianism is that it underestimates resource availability. You see, regarding drinkable water, according to the WHO, no, not the band, in 2022, 73% of the global population, which was around 6 billion back then, used a safely managed drinking water service, that is one located on premises, available when needed, and free from contamination. So we already have the ability to provide the supermajority of the human population across the globe with drinkable water. And drinkable water is not a non-renewable resource. We know how to easily purify water, make it drinkable. And then regarding non-renewable resources of fossil fuels, like coal and oil, we don't technically know precisely how much fossil fuel there is. How much oil and coal we know there is in the crust probably isn't it. There is probably more, because there's always more crust of the earth to discover. And if there isn't that much more, we know how oil and coal are made. We can actually simulate that in laboratories. So it's not unreasonable to think in the not too distant future we will be able to produce larger amounts of it. In other words, running out of fossil fuels is not that big of a concern because it's not truly non-renewable. And we could have more than we think. Now, regarding arable land, there's about 1.4 billion hectares of arable land in the world according to the FAO. And that's actually not that bad. And then concerning being able to grow enough food on that land, and concerning Malthus's original formulation, Malthus didn't account for future technological agricultural advancements that now allow us to produce much more food with less land than before, which has an increasing trajectory. If we continue perfecting new engineering, continue to perfecting new genetic engineering, then we can keep growing more and more food with less and less land. And now let's look at the specific problems with naturalistic catastrophic climate change. The specific problem with naturalistic catastrophic climate change is that these things aren't on a constant uprise to deadly levels like people make you think they are. Now let's take a look at each of these things individually. Now, first, regarding temperature, some people say, oh, it's the hottest it's ever been, or it's getting to that point very soon. Well, continual monitoring of global temperatures didn't begin till like the 1800s. And there's the medieval warm period from around 1,000 years ago, which was much hotter than now because vineyards were being grown at higher latitudes than today. So we can never really definitively say it's hotter than it's ever been. And it's actually cooler now. Also, temperature anomalies measured in Celsius, they have increased. Those are usually the graphs you see. But absolute temperatures in Fahrenheit, which is a smaller unit than Celsius, they've barely increased. Just take a look at this graph from NASA of absolute Fahrenheit temperatures over the span of many decades. Pretty constant, isn't it? Or what about the hole in the ozone layer? Well, look at how much the hole has changed between years. Go ahead and pause if you need to. Take a look at all the changes it's undergone throughout these years in the picture on the right. It seems to be able to be increased with a fair amount of ease, and yet it hasn't been increased to the point that we'll all die. So we probably don't need to worry about it getting to that point, seeing as how we probably should have already gotten to that point by now. And if we get incredibly close to that point, it also seems that the hole in the ozone is able to be decreased with ease as well. So we shouldn't worry about not being able to fix it enough. We shouldn't have to worry about it getting past a point of being able to reverse it. All right, now what about forest fires? Well, they're way down since 1930 and have increased to only a small percentage of what it was back then. And that increase didn't really start till 1990. Just take a look at this graph I have depicted. Also, forest fires have many ecological benefits to them, so we don't want them to be too down. All right, now what about hurricanes? Well, they haven't been constantly increasing at all. Whether you look at all categories, 1 through 5, or just the higher categories, 3 through 5. Take a look at these two graphs I have depicted. And finally, with these increases, what about the ice cap melting? Hasn't that increased? Well, ice caps have been increasing a lot recently, as in their size, as opposed to their melting. Let's take a look at this graph I have depicted. But some may still say, well, what about the polar bears? Well, polar bears need land, not ice, to live on. Polar bears do not require massive ice caps in order for them to live. They live on land. They are land mammals. They're just large bears built for Arctic climate. Now let's wrap up looking at the biblical problems with all these things. First of all, the specific one with disease alarmism is that it ends up treating pathogens, things that cause disease, as having godlike or nearly godlike power of destruction. It's a deifying of them or nearly deifying of them with much more power than they really have. All right, it's just a virus. It's just a bacteria. It doesn't have this divine power to bring the earth to its knees like you see in all these post-apocalyptic pandemic movies. None of them are realistic. Now, with neo-Malthusianism, is in direct opposition to man's God-given cultural mandate. God said multiple times, be fruitful and multiply, which is a cultural mandate. Never did he give a limit on that. He never said, all right, be fruitful and multiply to this many and then cap it off there. No, no, no. And children are a blessing that we should be trying to have as many of. Hence why infertility is a sad thing. Also, we aren't animals that need population control. Which, by the way, there are only two ways to control the human population: end current life or prevent new life. Does that sound good to anybody? I hope not. And naturalistic catastrophic climate change, specifically with the anthropogenic view, the view that it's all man's fault and the climate is changing to a point that will kill us all. This view arrogantly gives man the collective godlike power and sole responsibilities to sustain and destroy the planet. Really think about that. You're saying that the entire human population has the ability and collective ability to destroy the entire planet. And so that is then our responsibility to sustain the planet. Are you kidding me? How arrogant is that? And this also leads to an anti-human sentiment. Because again, you're saying it's man's fault, so I guess get rid of mankind. And it leads to restriction of fulfilling the creation mandate, which is subduing the earth. You keep coming up with all these restrictions. You can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this with creation, that with creation, to the eventual point where you can't do anything with it and not even stand on a blade of grass. Keep in mind that's hyperbolic for anyone who wants to get on me about that. And then finally, to end the lesson, the biblical problems with naturalist alarmism overall is that it completely ignores God's sovereignty. It fits pagan deism, not Christianity. Why? Because only God can destroy creation, and He gets to decide when it ends because He made it. Not us, not any pathogen, nothing. Nothing else but Him. And He has already decided when it's going to end. He will ensure that the end of creation occurs no sooner or later than at the absolute perfect time. Nothing can change that, nor would He let anything do so. God is not cruel and apathetic to just let creation destroy itself. He is not so cruel to say, you know what, humanity, go ahead, get yourself killed. Or, you know what, pathogens, just go ahead and wipe out the vast majority of humanity. How cruel and ungodly is that? Also, we are to be afraid of when the end of creation comes. Shouldn't be living in constant fear of it and be alarmed about it like all these people are. But we are instead to be prepared and gladly hope in Christ and take joy when the end comes. Who wants a creation that is permanently fallen? Yeah, what we're supposed to do is not to focus on this fallen creation, but to focus on the new creation that is coming, because that is the permanent one. And we're not to try to make this current one permanent instead. Because, again, the new one, that is our home instead. That is the one we should care more about. That is the one we should be focused on.